Are you tired of wasting your time on print-related tickets? PrinterLogic offers a centralized, cloud-native, IP-based print management system. Dump your print servers and discover the future of print management with PrinterLogic. Find out more and get a free 30-day trial at printerlogic.com/packetpushers.
Hi, I'm Jonna Till Johnson. I'm the CEO of Nemertes. I'm here with my co-host, John Burke, who is the CTO of Nemertes, and you are listening to Heavy Strategy, the show that seeks to ask the right questions, not give the right answers. And here's a case in point. John and I disagree somewhat vehemently, or maybe very vehemently, on the right procurement strategy for vendors. And what I mean by that is for most IT folks, they really fall into a handful of procurement strategies, which I would say fall into three main strategies. The first one, the most typical one for a tech-driven company, is best in breed. Let's say you need a cloud-based firewall solution, or you need an SD-WAN solution. So you sit down, you develop your selection criteria, you talk to the business, you figure out what you need, you put together your matrix of 60 selection criteria, you weight the selection criteria, and then you go talk to the vendors, figure out who meets the selection criteria. Whoever scores the best according to your weightings, that's the vendor you buy. That's very typical in smaller organizations, and it's pretty common in tech-driven organizations. But over time, what happens is you end up with a huge mishmash of all different vendors. You have a language problem because you have some technologists who understand, Cisco, some technologists who talk Palo Alto, some technologists who talk Junos, and Juniper OS. So everybody's a little bit flailing around. That you have trouble managing all of this because you have, if your Juniper person is out, your Cisco person can't fill in, et cetera, et cetera. So what happens is the CIO comes in and says, nah. We are going to take the big rock approach. We are going to work with a strategic vendor. And the best definition of a strategic vendor that I've ever heard was many years ago, a company said, I asked them if they had any strategic vendors, and they said, yeah, Oracle. I said, okay, that's interesting. What do you mean by a strategic vendor? And they said, well, if Oracle has the capability we need, we use it. We don't bother comparing whether it's better or worse than anyone else's.
Or even adequate, yeah.
Or even adequate. Well, no, if they have the capability and it's adequate, we use it. If they don't have the capability in an adequate fashion, we ask them if it's on their roadmap. If it's on their roadmap, we'll wait till it comes in and then we'll use them. If they don't have something adequate, it's not on their roadmap, we then ask them, is there something that's close to it on their roadmap or currently available? And if we can kind of tweak our requirements to use what they have, then we use that. And only if it meets none of those, do we look outside our strategic vendor. And that's typically what happens when a CIO comes into an organization. We're going to skinny down the number of vendors we use. We're going to shrink our vendor portfolio, and we're going to stick with our strategic big rock vendors. The benefit of that is it solves all the problems I talked about before with the best of breed. The downside is you don't necessarily get the best technology capability. And even worse, you end up being held hostage to that vendor because once you're locked in, they keep you locked in. And then there's the solution that research in years past has shown tends to work pretty well, which is this idea of, yes, we will go best in breed, but our goal is to minimize the number of vendors we're using and minimize the amount of integration that we've got. So we heavily weight existing vendors and, most importantly, integration to the environment that we currently have and or are planning to have in the near future. So that becomes a key selection criterion. And what we found is, at least for cybersecurity, which was the specific area we were looking at, that ecosystem aligned most closely with success. But John, I know you don't agree with me. So tell me your thoughts.
Well, I think it's impractical in the long run to try and take a pure ecosystem approach. I don't think it's realistic for a bunch of reasons, some of which are market related, some of which are organizationally related. On the one side, CIOs, CTOs, and CISOs will all come in and take an agenda of, being the new broom that sweeps out all the crap. And all the crap is the stuff that's actually getting the work done. But either isn't with their preferred vendor, the one that they understand and have partnership with in a personal sense, and therefore want to bring them in as their partner again to help them succeed in this new environment. That must be in terrible shape because they're not using that partner.
Yeah,
So
classic
that
Cisco move.
happens.
If you're not using Cisco, you should be.
And so it becomes this mechanism by which they put their stamp on the organization at a literal physical level of replacing product, and at an organizational human level by easing out the door folks who are committed to only other technologies and won't or can't adapt to this new one, even though they're really good at what they do with the other ones. So they're out the door, or they're reorganized into subordinate positions. Whatever, it becomes a political bludgeon as well as a technology strategy. So I think ecosystem approaches, although they should be more stable in the long term because there's no inherent center of gravity in them, right? The center of gravity is not any of the products or vendors. It's sort of the space in between them. That is inherently unstable because of human factors and because of market factors, because vendors get bought, vendors get sold, vendors go out of business. They may be really good at what they do technologically, but crap at the finance side. And so they go bankrupt, or somebody buys them because they're more successful financially. And then you wind up with your ecosystem getting pulled apart from the outside, and or one of them turning into a big rock strategic vendor because they bought 4 of the other ones that you work with. So suddenly you're in that big strategic space that you didn't want to be in, and you're presented with the option to either double down on what they do or completely rip out what you're doing and start from scratch almost. And neither one of those is a great alternative. And so I think you need a sort of a modified approach to ecosystem where you gotta pick somebody who's kind of strategic. And so that's like the big rock. And then you work around the big rock. You use the big rock for the 5 or 6 things that they're really good at, but you ignore everything else that they do because they're bad at it or they're not good enough at it. And you never change your requirements to meet their product schedule. You never change your needs to meet their abilities. Always you're looking to meet your needs. And if they can't, you layer somebody in around them who they work with pretty well. So you've got an ecosystem spread out around this one big rock in the middle of the water.
Well, John, I'm going to say you're not wrong, but, and of course, as everyone knows, but stands for behold the underlying truth, which means the part I said just earlier doesn't, you can ignore that because what I'm about to say is what really matters. I will say seriously, I think you're making good sense, but I will also argue that I'll take the devil's advocate position right now, because I do think it's relevant. One of the problems is that anytime you bring in a big rock, they are on a mission to become your strategic partner. So 2 examples. I think we've all seen how Cisco tries to take over not just anything to do with networking, but anything to do with application networking, anything to do with cybersecurity. And frankly, they're not necessarily any good at it. And now with the Splunk acquisition, they're taking over everything to do with logging and all of the myriad cybersecurity monitoring features that Splunk gives you. So
and APM, they want that.
Exactly. So basically, it's kind of like letting a shark have a little bite. It turns into a lot more bites and a big bloodbath. The second thing that I would also highlight is I think it's incredibly important. And the reason that I stress the ecosystem component, whether it's, as you suggest, a hybrid ecosystem model or, ecosystem plus big rock or just a straight ecosystem, is the thing to look for is pre-existing integrations, not APIs. If the vendor comes back and says, oh yeah, we have an API to vendor X, that means nothing. That just means you have to get some programming expertise to glue your stuff together and hope like hell it's going to work. That is a terrible way to run a technology department. What you want to do is say, no, I want to see your pre-existing in the proof of concept. You say you are integrated with vendors X, Y, and Z. I want to see you display the features I need you to see out of the box in your integration, or I'm not going to give you that check mark that you are actually integrated just because you happen to have an API. And I don't think, from what I've seen, I don't think enough technology professionals ask about that. I know some of our technology professionals include things like selection criteria. Is there a professional services organization that has skill in this particular technology or vendor? Okay, in that case, they can do the integration for us. But I really think you need to be pushing harder on the vendor to be doing the integration with other vendors for two reasons. One is you want to save yourself time, and the other one is you want them to be as committed to an ecosystem environment as you are. And I'm going to use a counterexample, which is a top of mind for me right now, which is Microsoft. The concern with using, most folks would say Microsoft isn't really our strategic vendor, they're just a big rock. Microsoft, anytime you use Microsoft for anything strategic, Microsoft will then end up trying to control everything. And I cannot forgive them for going in and basically saying in Enterprise version 3, having integrations with other third-party cybersecurity vendors that they took out of E3 once E5 came out, so that they would then say to you, oh, if you want those integrations back, you have to upgrade. So you have to pay us money to keep your ecosystem intact. Well, that's bonkers, guys. And don't even get me started on what's going on with Microsoft and cybersecurity generally. That may be a topic of an upcoming heavy strategy. But the point is, if you try to take this nice hybrid approach, the vendors tend not to let you succeed.
Let's pause the conversation for a word from sponsor Printer Logic. Remember how the future was going to be paperless? Yeah, not so much. And where there's paper, there's printers and print servers. If you're tired of dealing with print-related tickets, Printer Logic offers a simple, scalable, cloud-native, centralized, direct IP printing platform. Connect your print environment to easily manage front and back-end printing, integrate with EMR and ERP solutions, and get visibility and security. Say goodbye to print servers and reduce print tickets by up to 90% with Printer Logic. Find out more and get a free 30-day trial at printerlogic.com/packetpushers. That's printerlogic.com/packetpushers. And now back to the podcast.
Well, I'm only going to push back on you to the extent of saying, I'm not going to say Microsoft doesn't stink. I'm going to push back on you and say, you're going to wind up with big rocks in your ecosystem, whether you want them or not. So you might as well walk in with your eyes open and say, this is going to happen. I need to make my plans accordingly. And you can always, if you're taking a robust big rock ecosystem approach, be in a position to jump from one big rock to another, because none of them has too much of your functional portfolio under their belt. And even if they're best of breed for those 5 things you use them for, that doesn't mean that there's not somebody else out there who's, 2 points lower than them on your assessment grid. I will wholeheartedly agree with you that folks who are trying out new vendors for their modified ecosystem absolutely need to test all the integrations in the course of deciding whether to roll something out. They can't just have a checkbox on a spreadsheet that says we integrate with these 7 other things and then only test 2 of those integrations in the POC. You got to test them all if they need to do them all in production.
Yeah. And honestly, this is where I think we can sort of agree to agree, so to speak, because realistically, there's no way you're going to be successful in this day and age with a pure big rock strategic vendor approach like the one I used from years back in Oracle. You just aren't. If you tie your future to vendor XYZ, I don't care whether it's Cisco, Microsoft, IBM, Google, OpenAI, NVIDIA, it doesn't matter.
VMware.
You're going to get, VMware, yeah. You're going to go down with the ship when they stumble, and that's, to mix metaphors, and that's going to be a problem. So you obviously have to talk about how they're going to fit into your existing environment. You obviously have to think about the integration. And, as we all agree, that's something you should be testing for. That said, I think the bigger picture and the thing that John and I can also agree on is intentionality. So it helps a lot to sit down. If you're the CIO, you really need to think about which of these strategies you have, whether it's strategic big rock, best in breed, ecosystem, or some hybrid of them, why you have that, what is your overarching goal? If it's reduce the number of vendors you're working with, why? Why is that a problem? Does that just mean that your procurement department is lazy or incompetent or doesn't automate enough? Maybe you can help them automate. Maybe it's a bigger reason, which is these, in this day and age with the SEC requirements, cybersecurity for third-party providers, you're now on the hook for that and you don't have the ability to do an in-depth analysis of every single vendor, especially smaller ones, which is another conversation that we can have, because the bigger ones are no more, what's the opposite of recalcitrant? Calcitrant? No more willing to help you with their third-party risk assessments. But in any event, if you're doing it because the third-party risk assessment is so onerous, then think about that. But overall, you want to make sure that the decision that you're making factors in not only procurement's complaints about dealing with too many vendors, cybersecurity risks with third-party vendors, but also expertise required on your team, expertise required by third-party vendors, the need for all of your vendors to play nice together, whether they want to or not. And so even if you do decide, you listen to all this and you say, John's right, Jonna's wrong, we're going to go strategic big rock and maybe ecosystem around the edges, you're still going to have to force those big rocks to demonstrate that they have the integrations in place or you won't use them for the function you're looking for.
That's one of the huge things that people don't accept, like at an emotional level, is that they got to be ready to walk away from their preferred solution if it doesn't meet these critical criteria that are outside specific feature functionality stuff. Got to be ready to walk away and go with your second choice.
You put your finger on it, John, because that's the main visceral response I have to Big Rock, which is if you have Big Rock, now your vendor is your partner and you aren't willing to drop your partner. It's just a human response. And as somebody said to me a long, long time ago, the P in profits is bigger than the P in partner. So you may think of them as your partner, but they think of you as their profits. And that's not a good place to be.
Your vendors are not your friends. Even if the sales reps are your friends, your vendors are not your friends.
And does that sound familiar? If you've been listening to Heavy Strategy for a while, I think you've heard that point made. And that's a good thing. But it's really hard to walk away from a partner. It's even harder when your entire infrastructure depends on that partner. And again, to come back to Microsoft, we'll talk about this in an upcoming episode, but their cybersecurity breaches, their strategy for remediating vulnerabilities, their strategy for integrating with third-party cybersecurity folks is so egregiously awful that I have been recommending to our clients for a while now that they just walk away from Microsoft entirely. And you know what they say? I can't. I mean, that would mean changing email and my office productivity and Azure and AD and everything. And I can't do that. And my response to that is, why did you let yourself get taken hostage? And that's, I don't know that there's ever a good reason to let yourself be taken hostage, even if that vendor looks like they're gonna, meet all your needs. I mean, I've used the example of an abused spouse here, and I'm actually not kidding because that's usually what happens. The spouse comes in, and it can be male or female. This is not a gender thing. The spouse comes in, systematically begins isolating you from all other vendors. I mean, all other friends and relatives. And then begins working on you to make you feel vulnerable, make you feel powerless, make you believe that they are in charge. That really does sound like Microsoft to me. And if you're asking yourselves, how could we do this? How could we upend our infrastructure and applications to such a degree? The only thing I would say, I can't tell you should do it because I don't know the environment of anyone who's listening. But the only thing I could say is the fact that you're asking that question is the problem.
And it's definitely possible to keep in front of people the parts of Microsoft that they really care about, which is like Office applications and maybe Outlook, and uproot almost everything else they do inside the infrastructure. You don't have to rely on them for almost anything else that you do rely on them for. There are alternatives that your users will barely notice you implementing. So yeah, I'm with you there. I just got to say, though, as the counterexample, it's like if I require EpiPens, I have to deal with the fact that, Martin Shkreli just ramped the price up by a factor of 10 or more and still get them because, gosh darn it, I need EpiPens. So I need some of the things that Microsoft does for me, but it's really important to know that I don't have to do everything else.
Well, and that's the bait and switch that Microsoft and other vendors like to pull on you, which is, You may need something, but what they quickly do is translate that into either buy everything else from us, or we're going to jack the price up on that thing you need so much that it's not going to make financial sense.
Well, or you're going to pay me so much for that thing that you need and get all the licenses for all the other things too, that it doesn't make sense for you to spend money on anything else on top of what you're already spending money for us on. It's a twist on what you were saying, but yeah, it's their game, and it has been for a long, long time.
And so this comes back to the whole point of intentionality, because if you've worked through this, you're the CIO, you've worked through this, and you've thought to yourself, no, I'm going to reduce my reliance on Microsoft or Cisco or IBM, I don't care, Google, to bare minimum, then you have to go and sit down with your CFO and say, here's the deal. They're going to be offering a ton of stuff for free, and they're going to be jacking up the price on this because we are kicking them out of the role of abuser. And we have to be okay with that. It is going to cost us some money to do this, but the trade-off is risk avoidance in all the other areas where they could be bringing us down. And that's actually an argument that most CFOs will eventually buy into, depending on your relationship with the CFO, with chief legal, with the CEO. But you have to be prepared to have that conversation ahead of time, because I can't tell you how many times I've talked to clients where essentially they make all the right strategic decisions. Technically, it gets up to the CFO and the CFO says, but yeah, it's free stuff. Why aren't we getting the free stuff? Microsoft says all it can do in cybersecurity, everything that Fortinet and everything that Palo Alto can do. So why do I need Fortinet and Palo Alto and Splunk? And you're going to have answers to that well in advance and have had that conversation before it ever gets to the CFO's or procurement's eyeballs.
Free is never free.
That's it. As Robert Heinlein, who both John and I were enamored of in our youth, used to say, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And that is particularly true when you're dealing with vendors who like to buy you free lunches, but those lunches are not free. Well, with that, I think we've hit the end of the episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you've got feedback or follow-up for us on this topic, send us a message at packetpushers.net/FU. Again, that FU should stand for follow-up, but if it stands for something else, let us know that too. And also at packetpushers.net, you'll find the Network Break podcast, which helps you stay current on the latest tech news and what it means to you and your team. And there's a whole lot more on the Packet Pushers site as well, tech and other networking podcasts, our newsletters, and a job board where you can find fantastic engineers, and also a great Slack group where people get together and chat and argue and discuss and debate. If you'd like to talk to Jonna or to me or to John directly, you can reach us at nemertes.com. That's N like Nancy, E-M like Mary, E-R-T like Thomas, E-S, nemertes.com. And however you reach out, we look forward to hearing from you.